Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Board of Revenue Estimates with my esteemed colleagues, Secretary Brinkley and Treasurer Nancy Kopp. We have Mr. Andy Schaufele, who is the board's Executive Secretary and Director of the Bureau of Revenue Estimates. We generally start with Mr. Schaufele's report to us and thank everybody for participating who might be on the receiving end of this. And Andy, could you give us what you're proposing?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Thank you, members of the board. Happy to be here with you today.
We're very glad to have you back, Andy.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. I'm very glad to be back. I'm fortunate that I love my work, even when it's as difficult as it is.
I know your deputy is quite happy to have you back, Mr. Farkas.
He is, and I thought he did a great job in my stead, and
very good.
Great learning opportunity for everybody involved. So, but very pleased to be here. And as you kind of led me to right there, I just have to thank my staff, especially. They work their tails off to do this work in these difficult times. And then, of course, the Revenue Monitoring Committee, made up of all of your staffs, as well as the legislature. Just the time and diligence that goes into this really does push this to be a strong work product. And this estimate here, I think we know a lot more about COVID at this point than at any time, even just back in September. And we've taken iterative steps to get to where we are. And I'm going to show in my presentation what I think has changed since then, and use that to support these estimates that we're putting out. But as always, I want to get to the bottom line for folks. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and get to the bottom line as quickly as possible. It's never ideal to put so many numbers on the screen, as so many of us have learned during the COVID pandemic, but it's a necessity. And this will be posted on the website as well as on Facebook, so everybody can download this and look at it at their pleasure. So the chart is illustrated to show our fiscal year 2020 actuals here. And then for fiscal 21, which is the state's current year, ends this June 30th, we have the September estimate, the December estimate, the dollar difference between the two, which is the amount that gets added or subtracted from the budget, and then the year-over-year growth rate. The same thing for fiscal year 2022, the cash for September, the cash for December, the dollar difference, and the growth rates. So as you can see here, and again, just in the interest of getting to the bottom line is, for this current year, we're recommending that you add $63.8 million to the current year's budget. And then for next year, $142.5 million. As you can see, through all of our revenue sources, there are multiple moving pieces. The income tax we have going up $65.7 million relative to December. In fiscal 22, it's $115 million. This is driven principally by us upgrading our capital gains forecast. I'll show some charts on the stock market later. We know that capital gains are volatile, but at this point, we surely know that the market has been strong throughout tax year 20, and we also have no reason to doubt that that strength will not carry through tax year 21. Corporate takes a bit of a hit in the current fiscal year, as naturally profitability will be down for businesses, both corporate and non-corporate, and then bounces back in the next year as the recovery is in place. Sales tax, we have up $75.7 million. There's myriad factors for this, and I'll get into that in quite a bit of detail in just a little bit. But then it's flat over here in the next year. The reason that it's up this year and effectively flat next year is because as consumers can't really spend on services right now, we've seen them, which are not taxable by our sales tax in large. We're seeing more of that spending transfer over to goods, which are taxable. So we do have a kind of a temporary boom for the general fund. The state lottery is up. The state lottery has done well. Throughout the pandemic, it has proven to be a form of entertainment that's been consistently available, whereas much of the entertainment elsewhere has been removed. So we do see a bump there in this year, and some of that does continue to play out in the future. They're doing a very good job of managing their games. Throughout our other revenues, there's quite a bit of mix here. Much of this is due to, for example, the courts revenue. The courts are largely closed. We're not going to drive revenue from the courts. District courts is also related to traffic citations. Traffic citations are down, and naturally, I think police are hesitant to interact with folks when it's not absolutely necessary. So there's quite a bit of noise in these other ones, but as usual, we'll focus on the big ones, and I can take questions on the others later if you like. I'm going to pivot to the economic outlook presentation, if everyone's okay with that. Sounds good. Okay. This is simply a rehash of what I just showed you here, again, with the personal income tax and the dollar differences, the bottom line being 63.8 million for this current year and 143 million for the upcoming budget year. But I think it's also helpful not to just compare to September, but to look at it versus the last pre-COVID estimate. So this would compare to March. The March estimate is what was used to adopt the fiscal year 21 budget. So while we have positive news relative to September, it's important to note that our revenues are still down relative to pre-COVID. And it's significant. For the current fiscal year, it is just shy of $609 million. And while back in March, we didn't vote on fiscal year 2022, these were the official planning numbers that were in place and everybody was thinking about as they considered longer term decisions. Those numbers are down 312 million. So, it is important to try to draw that distinction between our comparison to the last estimate, and this is really closer to the meaning for budget purposes. So what has changed since September? First of all, we know that the winter COVID wave is going to be far more significant than the prior waves. That exists nationally and that exists in Maryland. Our expectation is that cases will continue to rise through December as family events throughout the winter holidays continue to take place. We do have tremendous confidence that the vaccines are not only going to be, that they're not only going to be working, but they're going to be rolled out quicker than our prior expectations. Our prior expectations had thought that we'd have a wide rollout in June of 2021. And now we think that we could reach that point in this coming spring. We have a better understanding of the federal stimulus, its scope, its size, and how it has supported households in the economy. And this is very, very important. And I'll try to illustrate that going forward. We have a better understanding of how the consumer has responded to the pandemic, including times where they've been under absolute restrictions, as well as periods of limited restrictions. And this is important as we know that several large jurisdictions have imposed more dining restrictions recently, and we have reflected that in these estimates. We know that the stock market has carried positive momentum. I mentioned that earlier. And it's important also to note that we keep metrics to compare the estimates against year to date. And so far, those September estimates, comparing those metrics, shows that we are performing moderately better. So there are several reasons that we feel more optimism at this point relative to what we felt in September. And I do need to discuss what's changed in our economic assumptions. We have explicitly adjusted for a difficult winter. Back in September, we piggybacked on the forecast from IHS Global Insight. During the pandemic, we have relied on some of the large national forecasting outfits. It's been necessary for us, as that way we can build off of their vast resources, especially their epidemiologists. So we've been working from IHS Global Insight. This forecast, we do the same, but we do make some tweaks to it. And those tweaks really involved us planning for a harder winter than what they had in their forecast. This is very important. We no longer have a second stimulus in our baseline. The economic forecast that we have to adopt is really worked on throughout the period of November, and it sure seemed far less likely in November that we'd see a stimulus. And even now, it's quite uncertain. That said, based on the research, we do believe the economy has tremendous momentum and savings as we head into the winter. That's a very good thing. But I don't want to take away that we are very concerned about the unemployment insurance situation. It's more of a basic humanitarian need and a public policy issue than a revenue problem. But, you know, that ignores the fact of how many households are in trouble, and the fact that much of the UI expired in this existing month. Now, should Congress pass a stimulus, especially one that's similar to the one that's currently under consideration, we feel it would largely maintain the pre-winter trajectory. That is to say, what we have in this estimate. It would likely have a moderate benefit to our economic fundamentals, but more importantly, it might boost spending. And if it does have this sort of effect, we will address that in March once we know more. There is an increased outlook for capital gains, and we do have stronger confidence in the V shape of the recovery. That was not how we started out estimating. We expected a much more drawn out recession, but the success of the stimulus really limited the contagion of the recession, and therefore we do feel confident in the V shape of the recovery. Now, here I also have to mention that the federal government will shut down today if they don't pass a continuing resolution. We're confident that a short-term resolution will be reached today or within the next several days that will limit that impact. But nonetheless, that's important to note that the federal funding does run out at the end of the day today. Just to put some of what I said into perspective, here's our forecast of employment. These are in thousands over here. The blue line is our current forecast. So the red lines are the IHS Global Insight forecast, and you can see that they've held relatively steady to what they thought back in September. I do like to point out Moody's forecast here. Oops, sorry. This is Moody's Analytics, and you can see that they have a much more drawn out employment recession. We don't believe that, but I think it's worth pointing out for transparency purposes that there are still multiple views of how this could play out. And I want to, while I feel like we feel much more confident in how to estimate revenues right now, we do have to continue to point out that there is a heightened level of uncertainty to these estimates relative to a non-COVID point in time. Looking at personal income, this is what drives spending. This is what drives the economy. You can see that the forecasts for that have been all over the place. Again, we're here in blue. This is the most recent historical point up here, 2020 Q2, which rises sharply on the back of the stimulus. We have that level coming down as the stimulus wears off, and then continuing to pick up with the expansion. And then driving our capital gains forecast. Capital gains are notoriously very difficult to estimate, and that always gives us pause as we include them in the forecast. But given that the S&P 500 has driven to a strong year throughout, we feel quite confident in writing up those capital gains. You see that here. This is the actual forecast for capital gains. You can also see quite a bit of that volatility. And I do like to show it all the way back to the pre-Great Recession so you can see how we compare. We still aren't expected to eclipse the amount of capital gains all the way back in 2006. But we have been expecting a downturn in capital gains in September, and now we have growth throughout. Now, it's important, what is driving the better revenue estimates is the disconnect between the social impact and the revenue impact? We know now that the impact is largely income bifurcated, meaning that lower income jobs are bearing the brunt of this recession. And the state's revenue structure is set to minimize the tax paid by lower income households, right? Maryland prides itself in being a progressive state. We have a more progressive income tax. It's actually the case that taxpayers making less than $50,000, they account for 43% of all of our taxpayers, but just 6.6% of the tax. So speaking from pure arithmetic, the fact that the impact of the recession is so concentrated in those lower incomes, it actually minimizes the impact on our revenues. And then adding to that, the stimulus has been so robust that it has actually helped those households sustain their spending. So we're actually not as impacted on the sales tax side as well. And here is where we can show the impact. And I'm sure this type is a little small for folks, and I apologize for that, but there's a lot of information to get across. This is a chart showing the orange bar is by industry. So here at the bottom, accommodation and food services, those are principally your restaurants, also your hotels. We see that job losses went above $130,000 from peak to trough in the recession.
$130,000?
130,000 jobs.
Yeah.
Since then, we've regained more than half of those jobs lost, and we sit there at about 35,000 jobs lost currently. Next up is healthcare and social assistance, where we know individuals have sought to not go to doctors' offices out of fear and trying to minimize exposure from COVID. And then as we work our way up, which is how this chart is sorted by the blue bars, what you see as you look over here is that the average wage in these industries is well below the state's average wage. So for example, the average wage in accommodation and food services in 2019 was $24,000. The state's average wage was $64,000. So this really does show you that the industries impacted are on the lower income side. We see that in our own withholding data. This chart looks at withholding, which is the amount of tax that's withheld from wage earners' paychecks to pay for that year's taxes. This chart not only looks at the year-over-year growth rate, but also looks at that industry share of the total. So that way we could really help get a feeling for the big picture impact. And naturally, you see accommodation and food services at the top there as contracting on the wage side. We see that in other services as well, arts and entertainment, recreation. And then we see many of our other industries on the plus side. And this gets back to Maryland's bones, right? We are a professional services economy at the backbone of it. And many of our folks can work from home and they continue to earn income. So this really does illustrate that bifurcation. You'll notice that the retail trade is on the positive side. And that's because retail trade has largely rebounded. There are sectors of retail that are deeply impacted. But in order to attract and retain workers throughout this, much of the retail trade has had to bolster their wages. So we do see a plus on their withholding. And at the very bottom there, you see unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is propping up withholding in a big, big way. We expect to get withholding of about $270 million from withholding unemployment insurance this year. Now, that's a temporary influx. We do expect a lot of that to be refunded at the point of filing, but as of now, it's propping up our withholding. The chart in the middle there just shows that, year over year, and this is amazing, right? We're in the depths of a recession, but January through October, our withholding was up 3.4%. If we exclude unemployment insurance, it's just 1.5%. But the fact that it is positive is still quite impressive. This chart also shows that the recession has been contained. That is the key to all of this. The federal stimulus in the second quarter was very successful at containing the recession to the directly impacted industries and really stopping that contagion from broadening out. And that's why our revenue estimates now are so much more positive than they were back in April and May. To illustrate the stimulus, this shows 2020 Q2, where through these 6 programs, and this does not include all of the money, this is the money that really directly propped up consumers and businesses, again, directly. This totals $20.3 billion. To put that into perspective, that is almost 5% of Maryland's entire economic output in 2019. That is an enormous sum of money. You can see by far the largest amount was the Paycheck Protection Program, just over $11 billion. But then we had stimulus checks direct to individuals at over $4 billion. And then through various forms of unemployment insurance, we reach almost $4 billion. So again, the breadth of the stimulus is just tremendous. And again, I can't stop underscoring how successful it was in stopping the contagion and how critical that has been. We also know a bit more about what's been done with the stimulus money, and this is important. On the left side of this chart, you can see from National Bureau of Economic Research, some polling they had done shows that 27% of that went into savings and 31% went into debt payments. And these numbers hold up relatively well across the income scale. So even in the lower income quintiles, much of those direct payments went into savings and debt payments. Debt payment also critical to helping you sustain. You know, I think this illustrates that the American people know better than to wait on Washington to provide a second stimulus. Folks knew that we were going to be going through a tough winter, and they have prepared for that. On the unemployment insurance side, the CBO estimates that 5 of every 6 recipients of the extra $600, and that expired earlier in the year, but this is important, they exceeded their work earnings. That has enabled them to sustain their spending. Typically, when someone shifts over to unemployment insurance, their consumption declines by about 7%. So again, that shift, that extra $600 really helped maintain spending through the depths of the pandemic. Looking at the unemployment insurance and the way it has directly affected our revenues, on the right there, you can see monthly how much revenue we've brought in from the unemployment insurance. It is starting to come down, one, as more folks have gotten back into the labor force, but two, as some of those extra benefits have worn off. First, there was the $600 that was extra. Then the feds put up $300, the state put up $100, so we had an extra $400 for a period of time now. But those additional amounts are fully out of the picture at this point in time. Now, I mentioned earlier that we think we'll get about $270 million throughout the year from withholding on the income tax side. But we've done quite a bit of research and simulations, and we believe that about 70% of that will be refunded come filing time. So in many ways, it's almost like a short-term loan to the government. As I pivot this to show the income tax estimate by tax year, you can see I show a lot of history here just to show prior recessions and what's happened. You can see the depths of the Great Recession where we fell below 5% for 2 years in a row. And again, in this recession, we wouldn't contract under this scenario. And then the V-shaped recovery to bounce back in tax year 21. A little bit more recovery in 22 to make, a V-shaped recovery means in large we recover. But to be sure, the restaurant industry will be rebuilding over the course of several years. And that's why we do see a slightly higher rate in 22 and then coming back to normal rates in the out years. Sales tax is a bit different. There was a large downturn in the spring with the shutdown naturally. The stimulus has been highly supportive, but there's also been a shift to durable goods as we replace activities. And there's been a shift to online spending, of course. That shift to online spending I highlight in this chart just to show how much these estimates have increased over time. So for fiscal 21, back in March, pre-COVID, we were thinking 324 million. In September of 2020, we bump up to 465. Now we're up to 550 million. More and more Marylanders are adapting online marketplaces as a place to make purchases during this. We expect that to continue somewhat into the future, and that is an important point to make. As I mentioned, there's also been a shift in what is being consumed. This chart is national. It shows personal consumption expenditures. Total is the green bar. Blue line is durable goods. Durable goods are things that last that you buy, like a dishwasher, a washing machine, a canoe, things like that. Yellow, non-durable goods, those are goods that you consume. And then services in red. Services make up more than half of spending. We generally don't place a sales tax on services. Services are the most impacted by the COVID recession. So as consumers can't spend on services, they're shifting that money, and the sales tax is temporarily benefiting from that. And that's that blue line especially. We know that those with means are spending money on improving their houses. We know that they're spending money on buying things to make recreation during COVID when there are fewer opportunities. So we are seeing a temporary boom in our sales tax as a result of that shift. Once the vaccine is available, we would expect that services bounce back. Perhaps they even consume more as there's pent-up demand for those services. That's also reflected in these estimates.
Andy, this sales tax does not include the online.
This includes everything, every aspect, regardless of where you buy it. This chart here that I'm showing.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's worth noting, I've gone to great lengths to illustrate the difference between revenues and the social impact. Hundreds of thousands of Marylanders are impacted in a very negative way by COVID. Our revenues are impacted, but less so. I have data that can show that the disparate impact also applies to businesses, and I think that's important to recognize. In the second quarter of 2020, when we effectively shut down, the top 0.1% of our sales tax accounts, which is 61 businesses, were up 32% year over year. The remainder of the accounts were down 22%, and we also had 11,000 fewer accounts. It's important to note that one account can be many locations. In the third quarter, when we've reopened, but of course, consumption is down in the aggregate anyway. That same top 1%, 55 businesses in the case of Q3, were up 37%. The remainder were down 4%. So, we do see a stark divide between the larger players and the smaller players out there. We see that in our withholding as well. This is our top 100 retailers. Okay, so just focused on the retail industry here. The top 100 retailers are 1% of the total, but they make up 50% of the wages. They were up 16%. The remaining 10,000 retailers were down 4%. But even within that top 100, it's a mix. So online retailers almost doubled their spending. That makes sense. Grocery stores, big box stores did well, up almost 20%. If you sold grocery, you were able to sustain your businesses, and you were even able to sell other goods while they were in your store, of course. Construction stores we know have done well. Anyone that's been to a Home Depot or Lowe's knows that those parking lots are packed. The smaller box stores, such as your CVS's, your Walgreens, your Dollar Generals, places that sell food in addition to other goods, also doing well. Our car sellers, car retailers, not as well. This has not been a great period for cars, although it's important to note we see another divide within there. The higher end car sales have been doing well. The average to below, not so much. And then our other big retailers, if you sell apparel, right? If you're in a mall, there's a good chance that you are down rather significantly. So, economists, revenue estimators, we always talk in the aggregate. And while the aggregate picture looks better than we may have thought, or you might even think if you're watching the daily news, it's important to know that within all of these details, it's rough out there for a lot of individuals and a lot of business owners. And I want to make sure we get that picture across for the policymakers. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and turn it back over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schaufele. And as usual, I would like to recognize the team that you work with. It's a collaborative approach in Maryland. So we've got folks who are part of the committee from the executive branch, the legislative branch, the treasurer's office, obviously, and the comptroller's office. So it's all led by you, Andy, and I just want to thank you and your colleagues. I have a prepared statement that is available to the press that I'll put out, but I want to take just a minute and speak for a moment from the heart. Guess not so much as comptroller, but more as a human being. We have hundreds of thousands of Marylanders right now who are unemployed and as of today are facing evictions, facing hunger, facing lack of medical care, facing end of relief payments, and none of it's their fault. It's just the pandemic and the mishandling that has produced this economic recession. And as Andy was saying, it particularly affects low-wage work salaries. So this is lower wage earners, I guess is the description. But it doesn't mean there's any less suffering. It means, if anything, there's more. Now, in addition, tens of thousands of small businesses have permanently closed, tens of thousands more hanging on by thread. So it's not only low-wage earners, tends to be the establishments that retain them. Many of them have closed around the state. So I joined Governor Hogan, and I appreciate his leadership in a bipartisan way with our congressional delegation and other leaders in the state in calling on Congress to pass a second stimulus before they adjourn for the year. But I also want, additionally, I want the state of Maryland to step up and do the right thing in the form of a Maryland stimulus plan. I've identified $1.5 billion in state reserves that could be spent immediately to prevent evictions, feed the hungry, provide medical care, and also support small businesses. You could actually add $1 billion to that if we went to when we go to the debt market in March. If we added $1 billion in debt, you could back out PAYGO money on state construction projects and basically forward fund that relief. Why would we do that? Well, we're going to have to do it because we're entering the 3 most horrific, worst months in Maryland's history, according to all the experts. Everybody says the virus is spreading like a out-of-control forest fire. So it's going to be rough, not just economically. It's going to be rough from a health and safety perspective. And obviously, lives and livelihoods of people that we know are going to be threatened. So the irony is that the vaccine is just around the corner. The silver bullet, the magic, the kind of fairy dust that's going to make everything go away. So all I'm suggesting is that for the next 3 months, obviously we need to take our personal health responsibility very seriously. And frankly, at this point, I'm not sure anything cohesive is going to happen anytime soon from the national level. So, well, I guess maybe down the road, but safeguard not just your financial security, safeguard your family and employees and people, and make sure this virus is something that you don't meet and get infected by. But the reason we need a one-time Maryland stimulus plan is that none of these health restrictions are really going to take hold unless there's a lot of relief. You can't expect the restaurants to all close and not give the owners of the restaurants some relief and not give the employees some relief. Hopefully the federal stimulus will have that. But while we're waiting around for it, I would suggest that we need a Maryland stimulus plan of our own to protect our citizens and our economy in that perhaps small bridge between now and the end of the month or middle of January. Tomorrow, frankly, in my opinion, is too late. And thousands of Marylanders across the state right now are looking at us and their leaders in state government saying, we love your rhetoric. You guys are all terrific, saying that you care about us and you want us to be safe and you want us to, not lock down, but we want everybody to be super careful and shelter in and and we're also asking restaurants to close. But what about not the rhetoric? What about the action that's actually going to allow us to do that? I mean, you can't shut something down if somebody's not getting any income in and they owe bills for rent, utilities, et cetera. That was the mistake early on in this, how we handled the pandemic. You've got to have the relief merge with the public health restrictions. If they do, we can prevent literally thousands of deaths and in the Maryland region, and obviously a lot more nationally. But let's just focus on Maryland. We have the money. We're a rich state. We have resources. I know we're worried about next year. We want to patch the budget next year. That's okay. I don't mind doing that and doing some surgery and making sure everything's solid. But the priority is right now for these individuals all over the state and their families. And anyone who lives in Montgomery County, like the treasurer and I have been stunned at the kind of food bank traffic jams that are all over the county. People backed up in long lines. It looks like something out of Houston, Texas or something. I mean, it is dramatically different than anything else we've faced. So just from a human level, I hope that the leadership of the legislature and the governor will reach some bigger, bolder, more expensive, one time only. This is not some kind of legislative program that goes on year after year. This is a one time only bridge relief plan for the state of Maryland, given the kind of revenue volatility that we are facing, but also just given the fact that most of us are fine. I mean, we're getting paid. We're protecting ourselves in our nice homes. We're, we're stir crazy, but we're financially secure enough to be able to do all the safety things.
Or we have jobs that allow us, to continue performing those jobs.
We're remote working, as we all are right now. Absolutely, Madam Treasurer. All I'm saying is that the people that Andy is talking about in this economic report are particularly subject in a demonstrably bad way to increased exposure to COVID and also real problems associated with poverty and housing, et cetera. That's where the impact is. So let's put on our social big pants and go out there and do something for our own citizens. And they're hurting. So that's my non-comptroller statement, I guess, that we need to reach down and reassess exactly what we're doing. Madam Treasurer, you were speaking up, and God bless you. I know you are sympathetic to the
humanitarian I would say that. I think your Peter Franchot's statement is one that I can certainly appreciate. Yeah, Andy, you're right. This looks on the whole at the highest level like a V recovery, which is excellent. Only, as we know, it's not really a V for everyone. And that's the problem. Not only have we shown a gap, but I think it's an increasing, we can see it increasing, what somebody earlier this week called a K recovery, in fact, going back pretty well for most people. But for some, it simply isn't. And I do agree it's our responsibility, because a lot of this is because of actions that the executives and legislature had to take to protect human health and safety. But you also have to allow people who have been through no action of their own put out of work. They've got to be able to support their families. They've got to have appropriate transportation to get to the jobs where we say they're essential. We talked about how great and essential people were, but now they're not even getting the minimal assistance that they did before. I would say, Comptroller, that you're saying perhaps that it's a rainy day today.
Thank you. Yes, Madam Treasurer.
And on the other, I do know that the legislature, and I assume that the governor, are looking at packages to bring in January when the legislative session convenes. The question is what's going to happen between now and the beginning of February. It's going to be the two toughest months. And I agree. We've got to step in. And if we do, if we step in correctly, it will not only help the communities and the families, but it'll help Maryland's economy. I mean, that is one heck of an investment to invest in our total economy. We're going to, as we have seen, well, we're projecting a significant decrease from what we thought 10 months ago 2021 would be. It is much better than we feared in March or April. We dodged a bullet in fiscal 2020, and it looks like we're going to be better than we anticipated in 2021, even though lower than we thought a year ago. And even 2022, we had talked about maybe going down $2 billion. It looks like that's not going to happen if things continue to go rationally and smoothly. But as the comptroller points out, there are a group of Maryland citizens who are paying for that. And we have to help them, I believe, pay for it so that we all succeed. So I do agree. Thank you,
Madam Treasurer. And Mr. Secretary.
Good. Good afternoon, everybody. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment too along this. Yes, we have some significant challenges ahead of us. And the good news is I think we do have some resources to try to navigate however we have to move forward. So I want to thank you, Mr. Comptroller, Madam Treasurer, and Andy. It's great to have you back helping us out. And I received a text from somebody. I didn't know Andy had come back. And I said, yep, and we're excited to have him back. And I think as the Comptroller had indicated, your deputy is more than he's probably the happiest person to have you back. It was called sink or swim when Mr. Farkas was having to handle some of that stuff. And certainly the revenue monitoring work group, they've had their work cut out for them, and also by the new way that we've all had to work. So, and first off, I think that, since Hanukkah started and all, I do want to wish everybody a happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas that's coming up,
yes,
a goodbye to 2020. I am anxious to see this year fade in the rearview mirror. I know that we all are. Welcome to 2021 and everything else that we have to deal with. And I ask everybody, continue to follow the CDC guidelines, maintain the social distancing, wash your hands, and as I'm glad came in the mail, wear the damn mask. People can do their part, and we can all continue to move forward. Remember, when we had a lot of the shutdowns before, we didn't have a lot of these guidelines. We now know what we have to do, but it's up to people to certainly follow it and do what they have to do. And all those actions just don't take the place of common sense. And I think that's one thing. We can't legislate common sense. You can't mandate it, but people do have to think for themselves and try to deal with it that way. There is a vaccine on the horizon. Andy referenced that in some of the comments that he had. And that, in and of itself, I want to point out to everybody, is an incredible accomplishment of mankind. I'm not going to go down Neil Armstrong's way that he talked about, but when you look back at polio, when you look back at even the most recent crisis we had with AIDS and how long it took for something to come to market to really enhance the life expectancy of people, and to see this happen in a 9 or 10 month window is extraordinary. And people haven't really checked that out to see where we are with that. And that really is a phenomenal movement that we have for just mankind. And I have my appreciation to the Revenue Monitoring Work Group for the work that they've done. And that's become much more difficult as we have to deal with this whole concept of volatility. Madam Treasurer, as you referenced, yes, these numbers are an improvement over what we thought we were going to see, but they still show a diminishment over what we had back in March. And I've even had some conversations with people where we might have been talking a $4 or a $5 billion hit early on in these conversations. We are now talking only $1 billion. Well, we're happy to have that challenge in front of us because I know that we're going to be able to surmount that. We're continuing the process of painting in the details of the revenue picture in Maryland as we grind our way through the significant impacts wrought by the coronavirus pandemic on our communities and our economies and our citizenry. Where once indicators showed a possible loss of several billion, as I just referenced, the governor's actions, your actions as member of the Board of Public Works have steered us away from many of the catastrophic issues that we might have been facing. We did institute a hiring and a spending freeze. We took necessary reductions with your cooperation at the DPW. And then the governor certainly was steering the ship for a safe and steady reopening of the Maryland economy. The governor did what he had to do to take the job of balancing the FY22 budget from nearly impossible to just as significantly challenging. We're going to get across the finish line. But we have to caution everybody looking at these numbers to understand there are a number of unknowns that could still alter our destiny. This recovery could turn into a sugar rush that crashes as federal assistance dries up. We're optimistic. We hope that we get additional federal assistance. Mr. Comptroller, I know you call for it. The governor's been calling for it. Everyone has been calling for it, but it's up to Washington to get their act together to actually get something out on the street. And maybe the worst unemployment news that came out yesterday as they saw that not improving might be a sufficient stimulus to move things forward. A slower recovery means that we will have to spend more on state social safety net programs. Andy, I thought that was a phenomenal comparison that you were presenting and the comments that you used. There is a disconnect between our social impact versus our revenue impact. That's what we're here to talk about, are the numbers. But as the comptroller eloquently put it, and the treasurer jumped on too, was we still have people that are dealing with this in a very adverse way. You made the mention, I think, Andy, that we're going to plow through some of this, and that brought to me, of course, I'm from Western Maryland, a snow plow that kind of pushes some people out of the way, and we have to ensure that we try to get some of those families back into the fold of what we have. As this pandemic drags on, complacency is just as much our enemy now as the virus. It's this last one that I'm most concerned about. A lot of people will get the vaccine. A lot of people, I think, will defend against getting sick in that regard. But we also have a lot of people who refuse to get the vaccine for various reasons. But the good news is, I think that with a vaccine out in there, our medical communities, our medical facilities will then be able to better accommodate those who will still get very sick, those who are either don't or can't get the vaccine. But that's what we want, is we want those teams, those professional teams that are having to deal with this, to have the capacity and the resources to be able to deal with those people. So even though these estimates will serve as the basis for our final decisions for our FY22 budget proposals, they do not take into account the economic impact the current resurgence of the virus is having. This necessarily lags the impact of what we're seeing, and those numbers probably will be or should be reflected in the March numbers when the legislature actually grasps with the concept of trying to put the budget to rest that we introduce. So while I've repeatedly praised the Revenue Monitoring Work Group for their work, we must understand we are all still in uncharted territory when we go through this. And again, as I said, volatility is the operative word. We could still be in for some unfortunate surprises. All we can do is prepare and provide like off ramps. When you go through the mountains, again, my Western Maryland analogy, you'll see an escape ramp every now and then for a wayward truck or where the brakes have failed. So, Mr. Comptroller, I believe you enjoyed my theatrical illusion last time in our last meeting when I compared FY21 to our first act of fiscal drama and FY22 to Act 2. So with the dawn of this vaccine ahead of us or upon us, we expect and we hope that we are approaching the final curtain of this pandemic. But we certainly haven't seen the end of its impact on us. And as I was writing some of these words, it occurred to me that there's times that you get up from a play, the curtain has dropped, and everybody walks out of the theater in awe of what just impacted them. They can and remember that maybe for generations to come. So that's what we're looking forward with this. We don't really know what that final impact is going to be, even when we get our arms around it. I look forward to working with Governor Hogan and as you, members of the BPW, the General Assembly, and the rest of the state government, as we continue to look forward to handling this aftermath. And so finally, I do wish everybody a very safe holiday. It's only temporary. We have to deal with it this Christmas, this Hanukkah. Maybe there might be some lingering to next year as we're dealing with still some vulnerable populations. But keep yourself socially distanced. Wash your hands. Wear the mask. I held it up here earlier, but just do your part. And again, just use some common sense. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and address this forum. And Andy, again, thank you very much for the work that you and the team have done. And we're looking forward to putting something together with these numbers.
Very eloquent statement. Thank you very much. Speaking of theater, did you notice the second individual in Britain to receive the vaccination was a 81-year-old gentleman with the name of William Shakespeare?
Yes.
I did.
So,
the bard lives on. So.
Yes. No relation, he said, but who knows? Mr. Schaufele, could you articulate the motion that we can entertain?
Yes, sir. Please. Is there a motion to adopt the fiscal year 2021 estimate of $18.774 billion and the fiscal 22 estimate of $19.808
I would so
billion?
move if I could hear a second. That would second. And all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Good work. Thank you, Andy, and thank you to your team. And yes, everyone have a great holiday season. We, of course, are going to not see our kids or our grandkids like lots of people, but we're going to be very happy zooming in with them on.
Thank heavens for Zoom. Yes.
Take advantage of the technology that this generation's been blessed with. I mean, imagine back in 1918, they didn't have these options.
Imagine someone like you and me actually being able to negotiate this stuff, David. I mean, that's the okay.
Come full circle there, right?
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. And that, do I need a motion to adjourn? We'll so move. We're adjourning. And thanks, everybody. Anybody who's on the receiving end of this, you can have access to any of the people involved just by contacting Mr. Schaufele. Do you have a contact number up there somewhere?
Yes, and it's on my
Excellent.
presentation.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
So,
Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.